All right, good afternoon. Honored to be here, honored to be asked to do this, honored to be with you four, so this is going to be fun. You're not here to listen to me, so I'm going to try to stand back and get out of the way as much, and so you can listen to these four really smart, interesting, accomplished gentlemen talk. What I guess the goal for just the first question and our first part of the conversation is to get to know the four people who are up here, a little bit about their backgrounds. And I thought I'd tee it up, and if we could just go down, starting with you, Mike, and then Stephen, Chris, and Tom, if we could go down the row and try to keep it as tight as we can, because there's a lot to get to today. Talk a little bit about your background, what you're doing right now, what you've done, and then the answer to the question, or the question to answer is, in the past year, what are you most proud of? And it could be a blazing success or a struggle slash, I don't want to use the failure word, but I just said it. But it could be something that was a great challenge. So, Mike Davis?
So nice and tight, right? So I was born in England, 1972, a little town called Ivinghoe.
Love it. All right, Stephen.
I work for Fox Sports. I'm in charge of the field operations, remote operations technology for the national networks. In other words, the bit that's not being sold to Disney. My team takes care of everything from the smallest college basketball game to the Super Bowl and the World Cup when we do those events. And yeah, I mean, I'm proud of an awful lot of things that we've done, but I suppose going to having the team, having over 300 people in Russia, and accomplishing what we did with our partnership with HBS for the Men's World Cup this summer was certainly a highlight, and hopefully to be replaced by the Women's World Cup in Paris this upcoming summer.
Awesome. Stephen.
Hey. Isn't that what you do on the microphone? So Stephen Wharton, Chief Operating Officer, Chief Technology Officer for Skycam. I've been with Skycam for 15 years. Prior to that, did some consulting, started a company that ended up getting acquired at Wintercom about 15 years ago. I'm trying to think of what we've done that I can say one singular thing. We've done a lot in the last year. It's been very busy for us. We've done virtual reality and 360 applications off of Skycam. We've done 4K now coming off of Skycam. We've done dual Skycams.
Anything not involving Skycam?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, just the last year, last 24 months has been, I mean, the basketball stuff we did at Summer League, really transitioning. I think probably if I had to say what's the hallmark item that we've done in the last year or so, it's probably doing the NBC Thursday Night Football game camera from Skycam, which was actually sort of where everybody thought Skycam would be maybe 10, 15 years ago, to really making that happen. That's probably the thing that we're probably proudest of, is that we made that happen, and that's really transitioning forward with the new leagues, whether it's AFFL or AAF or just our regular coverage. So.
And we'll talk more also about what you're excited about in 19, right? Not necessarily just looking back. Chris, tell us about it, Turner, what you're doing.
Chris Brown with Turner Sports. I oversee our remote and technical operations and field operations. So there's a group of about 4 of us that look after everything from streaming PGA.com to the NBA on TNT, or as well as the NBA TV operation, both studio and the few times a year they go out on remote. So, I've been at Turner now for just over 10 years. Prior to that, was at NMT, working with production trucks and operations for that group, working for Mike actually. And World Series, a few other things like that. But if I had to, like everybody said, the year's been a pretty good year for Turner Sports. We've done a lot of new things, with everything from UEFA to our normal baseball coverage, our postseason and NBA. And I'd say the one thing that that we like to look at now is probably going to be our coverage of the match. The broadcast coverage, not the pay-per-view part. Insert. But no, it just
Tiger and Phil. For anybody who doesn't know what the match is. Yeah.
And so We, just the time frame that we were given to actually put it together, from when it was announced to when we decided how we were going to put it together to when it was decided that it was going to be 4K or 1080p HDR. There wasn't a lot of time, and there was a lot of good work from a lot of really, really good vendors that was put into that for us to be able to pull that off. And from a technology standpoint, from a show standpoint, we executed on all of our technical points, which was just exciting for us to kind of look back and say that from the production elements, that things really worked well. So.
Great. Tom Carlisle.
Hi. I'm Tom Carlisle. I'm the senior engineer at Sneaky Big Studios. My past was 20 years ago this year. I started working in broadcast, building radio, streaming, and broadcast production facilities in New York City, along with a lot of recording studios and post facilities. And then transitioned over to working for Fox News in New York. And my wife and I had a son, and we decided to move back to Arizona, where I went to college, and was working for the NBC station, KPNX out here, for about 2.5 years, and the opportunity arose to come over here. Digital Glue is the company who helped integrate this facility and design where it's at, the outline of it. They needed an engineer to come on. They had asked the staff here to say, can you find someone? They brought me in, and in 2.5 months we built what you're going to see today. We wired from nothing in there. In 2.5 months, we put the entire facility together. There's 25, 30 miles worth of cable that connects just the router to everything else in there, not counting all the other camera feeds and everything else we got. It was a large pool. There was about 15 or so people here, and aside from my family, the thing I am most proud of is the place you're in right now. It was a labor of love to build this place. It is an incredible place to work, and the people here, one of the best teams I've ever worked with in my life. So, keeping it short for you.
Yeah, no, thank you. No,
this is the most proud place I've been.
I'm also proud of my family.
I'm sorry, Mike. I'm sorry, everybody.
Hi, Mom.
Steven hasn't seen his family in a while because he apparently, is on the road all the time.
So, Chris, I'm going to start. We're just going to go down the line. It's easier for me to remember where we started and where we end. Or Mike, excuse me. So let's talk about transmission methods. And I was at CES 2 weeks ago, and for the second year in a row, it's 5G, 5G, 5G. And I think even Verizon was telling people, everybody chill. Don't get.
Yeah, somebody has to. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've done some interesting things with 5G. You want to talk about and tell everybody some of the things?
We kind of scratched the surface, right? I mean, I don't want to overstate what we did, but we used 5G. We partnered with Intel and AT&T and Ericsson and our Fox Innovation Lab, and we basically sent multiple cameras over 5G, and it was 4K HDR, and literally that was it. We put it into the production workflow. We tested latency, and we just kind of getting our teeth into it. And we really did it for two reasons. Number one, you want to kind of see what the technology is, and whatever we did would, we would have totally done differently, just a couple months later, and whatever equipment we used would have been miniaturized to the extent that, it could fit in your pocket, whereas, what we dealt with was a whole rack of equipment on a golf cart. But what did it show us? I think that the second reason was more important, which was to sort of, and not just for Fox, but for everybody, is kind of get a seat at the table in terms of what 5G is going to mean for all of us. Now, 5G is going to be the most overused, annoying term since artificial intelligence, okay? And and nobody's going to know what even it is. And that's just going to be something that we're going to go through. But what I think it really is going to mean is that it will transform the way that we are going to do television production. And more importantly, it's going to transform the way that we're going to consume it. And to sort of go through all that, we'll basically take the rest of this panel. So I'll leave it there.
Perfect. No, great answer. So, Stephen, let's talk a little bit about how at-home production scales. Right. One of the things I was most struck by in some of our conversations in the past is the fact that you have 23. What would we call them?
We call them systems.
Yeah, 23 systems for Skycam that you're going all over the place, setting up, breaking them down. Nothing exists within the facility, the stadium. How does at-home production scale, which is one of your challenges?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point for us as a vendor to, whether it be Fox or Turner or CBS, whoever. You know, everybody has their guys that they want to use, and a lot of times we can't give everybody who they want. So right off the bat with labor, we're able to take operators, you know, using the AAF as an example. We've got a game on Saturday, let's say a game on Sunday. Our same top-level operators can now operate multiple games because I don't have to physically locate them at each game. We did a test last year with CBS. We did 2 tests. We did a test for the Thursday night show where we operated the Skycams remotely here out of the Sneaky Big with SMT, and then did live insertion of graphics here, and then we did another game that was from Lambeau Field to the UK. And so what ended up happening is the operator for that Thursday night game in Lambeau was able to be on site at Lambeau, do the game on Thursday, do the game on Sunday, and basically have shared resources. And so when you look at producing a show, having an additional enhancement like Skycam, and being able to show that technology can be remoted and get the scale of having operators who otherwise wouldn't be available or who can't travel. I mean, there's plenty of guys that at the edge of their careers don't want to go do 20 weeks on the road for a package. Now this starts to open up an opportunity and say, hey, maybe there's a way that we can still have you out there without having all the additional travel that goes along with things. So that's that's a really interesting point for us that we're invested in.
Yeah, great. Chris, you've done REMIs for Ryder Cup, for Olympic basketball. When I think of the size and scale of different kinds of events, is there a metric that you use where something's too big or too small to take advantage of at-home production?
I think there's definitely a point where something can be either too big or too small. I think some of the first challenges that we or try to ask ourselves, or the first questions we ask ourselves are, by going to this model, realistically, what is the downside? Because in some respects, when you do choose to go that route, you are putting a lot of, you're basically taking all of your eggs and putting in that basket. You're not really giving yourself a ton of production redundancy. So we look at sort of what the intended, is it a .com show? Is it a streaming show? Is it, are we, for us, are we just filling time, in terms of do we have, tonnage that we just need to get done to sort of fill the holes? I think we look at all of those pieces. Or is this something that's really big that we want to do, but our budget, this is a lot of travel and our budgets don't afford us to do a lot of travel. There's a number of those factors that all have to sort of be weighed out and vetted through production and operations and finance. Before we finally come down to it, we started off doing 4-camera basketball and worked our way up to pre-Olympic basketball at 8 cameras, and then we took it overseas and went 16 cameras with the Ryder Cup, and each one was a success in one way or another. And to Stephen's point, one of the key drivers that when we looked at, like at one point we were doing some basketball for the development league, and they had 5 days of 4 to 5 games a day. And when you look at the NBA TV network and just that group, right, there's only so many people, and they still have the studio shows to produce at the end of the night, and then there's the shows that are in between the studio shows, and it's the same production people, and they don't have a big staff. So going to the REMI model allowed a producer and director to produce and direct 2 out of the 5 games, and then still be in the studio to manage the studio shows. And then you look at the USA Basketball, again, that's something where there were multiple games, but we wanted the coverage to be more in-depth because it is Olympic basketball. If a key player gets hurt, you want to be able to document it, but at the same time, we didn't want to necessarily roll production trucks and send people on the road. Same kind of situation in terms of staffing, and so we expanded it to cover that. So there are a number of factors that all sort of come together to when you make your final decision.
Well, just as a follow-up, if one of the main reasons behind people going the REMI at-home route is cost savings, right? When is it too small? When is?
I think you can jump. It's a single event is not the answer.
Okay.
I don't think.
I think what's important here is to say that there's no one model here, and that it's not an all or nothing. That's why I'd really say there's probably no show too small or too big, only because, like, if you've got a large show, you could think about peeling off elements of that show that were previously on the road, whether that's editing or graphics or, something else that, you can compartmentalize and pool your resources back home. We're doing this for NASCAR, whereas our pre-race editing was on site and has been on site for some time. Now it's going to be back at home. So I think that there's different ways to skin the cat, and I think that if you go around the room for everybody who has done this or trying this, and you'll hear how Mark and the Football League are going to do it. I mean, everybody's got their own sort of bespoke recipe for, REMIs, or we like to call them home run productions, right? Because, I mean, who doesn't like a home run, right? Kind of get everybody on board. But even when you go whole hog, okay, is talent going to be on site? Are they going to be back home? And that all means different things. And maybe that's what kind of makes talking about this interesting, is that there are so many combinations. It's not just doing one or the other, right?
It's not an either or, it's and. Yeah, no, great point. Tom, so we're talking about how to take advantage. You've now built a studio that has the capabilities to do all of the things that these folks want to use people like you for. Talk about that challenge a little bit. And, Jason gave you heart palpitations talking about the first game in 2 weeks, so...
First off, you can only control what you can control. And the second was, what Turner does and what Fox does and what NBC does and what CBS does, those are very different doeses. They're all doing it a slightly different way. So as us being kind of the middleman between where Steven has his equipment here and maybe Chris or Mike would come in and do something here, it's about having the connectivity that they need to be able to get in and out and be able to answer the questions they need and be able to interface with the trucks that they've decided they want to use on there. How can we connect to that? It's about looking at all the unknowns that might be out there and how do we make them known quantities? How do we state obvious questions that people might be missing? Things we think are obvious are not always obvious to everybody. So, not to get into what we're going to be doing in a couple of weeks, but there's always challenges. And these are the things that we come in to try to help. We have a facility. There's a known quantity of equipment here. We have great relationships with third-party vendors that we can bring in other equipment. We can augment what we have here. We've designed the facility in such a way that we have a lot of racks pre-wired with router drops so we can put stuff in, connect it, make it work. We're doing it now, and as you'll see outside, there's a production truck sitting outside right now too, because we know we are doing 2 shows, so we need to have that second production truck. It's an issue of scale. It's an issue of being able to provide answers to the questions they have, because it's easy to say, hey, we want to do this REMI production. We want to do it out of your facility. Now the big questions we ask are, how am I getting out of the place you're doing the REMI at? What kind of connectivity do you need? Where is this going to be shown? Is it on a 3-inch by 5-inch screen, or is it on 4K HD TV in your living room? I need to know these questions, and I can answer your transmission about that. And then we start looking at the bigger things that we miss, which are things like, how do we do comms over this? How do we tally over this? How do we do scoreboard data over this? How do we do all these other big questions that you need in order to complement this event? And the work we've done from doing demos for Manchester United and the productions they've done out here, to the work we do with the Skycam, to the upcoming work we have with the AAF, every one of those was different. Everything we always do is always it's a clean slate. We start over. So we have to sit down and talk to Chris, and we got to talk to Mike, we got to talk to Steven, we got to ask, what are your real needs, and how do we make that happen? And then how do we kind of build that out? And it's all about communication. It's like anything else we do in our lives. It's about communicating clearly and understanding the needs, and starting slowly and growing bigger. You want to take baby steps until you've got the workflow down, and then you can start growing and making it bigger and bigger and bigger and more impressive.
Great. No, thank you. Mike, like the discussion about metrics and what things that are too small, too big, the Goldilocks question. The follow-up to that, and we can go down the line, is what's your metric for success, right? There's revenue, there's qualitative metrics. How did it look? There's a knock of the knuckles with you and your boss at the end of a show, of a game. How do you measure success?
Always a good question. I mean, I think that, you got to take a step back and say, okay, what are you trying to achieve, right? With this sort of thing? Are you trying to avoid the expenditure of capital, or are you trying to reduce run rate? Or are you trying to, in Steve's case, perhaps, leverage the talent that you might have? So I think that there's measures of success in all of those things, right? And, And that's why, again, it's not a one size sort of fits all. But, you know, just in terms of overall success for a home run production is saving a demonstrable amount of money one way or another and making sure that your network looks good. Home run. Exactly right. Touchdown.
Yeah.
Somebody else can use touchdown productions if they like.
Yeah.
But those are the two, I think, achievable metrics that you know you can do. And you know, when we looked at the World Cup, and as NBC looked at the Olympics, you know, there's a hell of a lot more money to be saved, because for every person that we sent out to Russia, we had to spend $35,000 in T&E. So you could very easily say, okay, well, this editor who was going to be in Russia, now we are moving him here, and it is going to save us $35,000 in T&E. And then we look at the end product, and Mark was involved in all this stuff too, and you say, all right, that looked fantastic. We got everything that we wanted out of these people, regardless of where they were, and that is the sweet spot.
Stephen, how about you? Metrics for success?
Yeah,
with Skycam?
So I think the highest metric is always, you know, we ask back, right? Did they get the value? Did the customer get what they wanted out of us being there? And so I think to Mike's point, that varies, right? Are we talking about a lower level show that otherwise couldn't have Skycam? You know, is Mike or Chris's efforts in trying to do some things remote so that they can add Skycam to the show where they otherwise couldn't? Or is it a show that otherwise just wouldn't even have Skycam? Is there a way for us to you know, offer to them remote? We had a system that was in, a couple systems that were in Canada for a while, and to Mike's point, we were T&E to send an operator that's specialized in Skycam up to Canada. It's expensive, you know, there's a ton of games, and so had we been able to remote that operator, we could have given them an operator that, you know, could otherwise be at home and have a greater skill set and remote them. So for us, it's really what is it the client wants? And if the client is saying, I want to have this operator, I want a Skycam that otherwise can't get it, or we want to cover a show that otherwise we can't do, or we want to get Skycam and virtual enhancements, or I want the Skycam with the virtual enhancements, does bringing a facility or having a workflow that allows us to deliver for them, that's probably for us what really is our measure of success. Are we doing or providing a solution to them that they otherwise can't get? And I think, again, to Mike's point, every home run production or REMI, just like there's 1,000 names, there's 1,000 different workflows. I mean, right now, you know, a lot of people talk about end-to-end, right? We're going to remote, everybody's going to be here at Sneaky Big, let's say, or pick your facility, and we're going to cut and edit or shoot the show from here. Well, that might not be true. We might have a spoke system where, you know, a Skycam operator's here at Sneaky Big, but the rest of the show is going on somewhere else. Or it might be at your graphics department is in Atlanta, and the Skycam operator's here at Sneaky Big, and the show's still going on. This is really changing the workflows where you go from just monolithic, you know, on-site trucks to monolithic remoted to ad hoc spoken wheel systems where it's not about where's my operator or who's doing graphics. It becomes about transporting data. And that's really, you know, that gets back into the 5G discussion, but it's really about transformative technology, which, you know, changes the workflows as we know them today.
Yeah. Chris, you good for a different question, or do you want to answer that one about the metrics of success?
No, I think the metric for success, I mean, Steve said it, Mike said it.
Yeah.
It varies just as much as the productions themselves. I think one of the words that comes to mind when I think about a metric for success is value. Did the end customer, in our case, or at least in the case of our group, it's production, did production get the value that they were anticipating by us using this methodology, by us using this transformative technology, whether it's video over IP or whatever it might be? Did they get the value for the production, and did they check off the objectives that they had? And obviously, there are other pieces that fall into that. There's the sales metrics, there's the end customer who is the league or whichever governing body that we're working for. But kind of most immediately, or at least kind of at ground level, it's did production cover off on their objectives? And so when you look at something like the Ryder Cup that we do for PGA.com, it's very, very small budget, very, very high expectations. How do we match the small budget with the high expectations when the production needs to take place in France? It's not going to be by sending everybody to France. And then on top of that, it's not even going to be, ordering traditional bandwidth. It's not going to be a fiber feed with a multiplexer, because then at that point we're actually talking about multiples, because they want 16, 20 feeds back. So it's a sliding scale, and it's figuring out how do we fit into that, and so that, I think when you come back, and I think to Mike's point, when you go back to your production team and you ask them, did they get everything? Did they get value for the production? For the technology that we put together for their production, and they can look you in the eye and say that we got everything we needed to get in. Because that usually covers or checks the box on all the sales executions too, right? So when they come back to you and say that they were able to do that, and we managed to stay within their budget, then I think, and that's one type of production.
Yeah.
And again, it changes based on what we're being asked to do.
Tom, I would assume your answer would be closer.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
right down the line. Is T-Man happy with me or not? There's my success. If he's happy with me and he's not, he's not staring at Ben, we're in good shape.
So let me ask a question about, we spend a lot of time as a firm talking to consumers, and here we're talking about technology and how technology can deliver to consumers, viewers, superior experience, but also save money and do things more efficiently. Is there a challenge between the consumer-viewer ideal, or how do you keep that into perspective with the technological capabilities? Because we can do it, does having a Formula One announcer in Connecticut versus in Monaco detract from that? And how do you balance the consumer and the production side of things?
We do a fair amount of our NASCAR truck series at home, and Michael Waltrip is one of our lead analysts there, and we did I think it was Bristol. We brought we did most of the stuff back in Charlotte. We did a track feed, so I mean there was, like I said, there's a little bit of a different recipe. But when he got out of that, he thought he could actually call a better race off tube, giving him the feeds and the different things that he asked for than he could at the track. So to answer your question, there are some cases where it may actually benefit the consumer to do things this way. However, as always, the consumer doesn't care about how you're doing it. They just care about what they're seeing on TV. And for a network like Fox or Turner, I'm sure, you don't want to be flipping around, and because you're doing a 4-camera basketball game as an HRP or a REMI, it can't look like crap, because that's just going to water down the expectations of what you're doing when you're actually spending money on the productions, I feel. So the consumer really shouldn't have any idea about how you're doing it. However, there are some tools that I believe we can give our talent to better help them with calling an event, even if they're not on site.
That's interesting. I'll go to Chris, just because you guys live in that same world.
I would agree 100% that at the end of the day, they just want to see it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, they're not worried about how we get there. But one thing I think that, we have to, as we create the content, as we deliver the content, we have to be smart about is that the consumers today are really smart. You really, sort of the notion of quote unquote fooling them these days, as we've, again, not so much necessarily related to REMI production, but just as we look at, some of the gaming things that we've done, I mean, they know the difference between 1080, they know the difference in 1080p, and not just because their devices are telling them, but they know. And so I think when, one of the other parts to that is as long as we can provide all of the pieces to properly tell whatever story we're telling, right? And again, kind of knowing our audience. So when we did, Development League basketball with 4 cameras, with replays and so on, there's that. But then there's the Olympic basketball where it's 8 cameras and we have replays and the announcers are on site versus back in Atlanta. Those are some of the decisions that I think go into, as you are, again, knowing your audience and also being honest and true to the sport and to the fan that's actually watching the sport, and not trying to sort of, quote unquote, fake them out.
Very good.
I think we just have to be honest with them. And even with the Ryder Cup, right? The announcers were in the studio. We weren't shy about it.
Yeah. interesting segue. So, Stephen, it's not about me, but I'll make it about me. My son and I, big college lacrosse fans, and you talk about technology and how it enhances potentially the viewer experience. Flipping around when we go to ESPN Plus or something, and all of a sudden it's only the Skycam view of that, and I don't think there was any announcer. And it was kind of an interesting consumer viewer experience for us. We hung out, we kind of went back and forth. Talk about how you're using technology to enhance beyond the obvious the consumer experience.
Yeah, so I think, that falls into a couple different things. One, we talked about value for the production, so we did a remote production with the Switch out of their offices in LA to Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts. So spanned the whole U.S. on the women's college championship lacrosse, a game that otherwise wouldn't have Skycam. But because we were able to leverage the operator staying there in LA, we were able to cover the men's semifinal, the men's final, and then basically throw in the women's final for free with the savings that they had by doing it this way, right? So, that's the first part about back to value. Second piece is everybody, Fox, CBS, ESPN, they all have these now ISO channels where they'll isolate us, maybe put nats in, or just effects mics and let you watch the game. And so I think to Chris's point, the consumer is educated, they're very smart, and they're selective in what they want to watch. And so it's not just, this is the broadcast and this is what they have. They're looking for, I don't know how many channels ESPN had for the college playoffs, right? But one of those selections was us as a primary angle. And so as a younger audience who sort of leans that direction can adopt that's available for them as well to take up. And again, we'll see where that goes. We did the test, for Sunday Night Football. We get more and more that we did the Summer League again. That was a primary angle from Skycam for basketball, and that's changing. So all those distribution channels create an opportunity for us. So it's great.
Great. No, thank you. Tom, before we get to our last question, how do you handle the challenge of multiple transport modes, right? So you've got a bunch of different pipes, some literal, some figurative.
Yeah.
How do you, as a production facility, at-home facility?
Again, first question is, where are you coming from? Where's the facility and what does it have available? It's going to dictate a lot of how we do that. And then what are we doing where's it going to be put on TV? Is it going to be on your phone? Is it going to be streamed to Twitch? Is it going to be something that's going to actually be on, again, your 4K TV? That's going to dictate compression and how we compress the video down. How many cameras are we going to need to get? Is it a 4-camera job? Is it 16 cameras? Is it 20 cameras? Those are going to dictate a lot of how we do this. Is how we carry it. There's a lot of vendors who do it. We have a number of them in our facility. It's just leveraging the right one for you, because not every vendor is in every facility. Turnaround time to get them into a facility can be 2 or 3 months, depending on where the facility is and what the infrastructure in place is. So you have to think of your best purposes. Are we using bonded cellular, or are we using a 1 gig connection? Do we have 10 gig fiber? Those are going to be the big questions we ask on getting it out. So we try to have as many of them as possible in the facility, reasonably, and then we pivot depending on the client.
Perfect. All right, well, I've been watching my clock. I want to make sure we're on time here. Last question. We're just going to go down, and I'm not asking you to give up state secrets here, but as you look at 2019, and it could be something you're doing, something your vendors are doing or offering, or just something, again, qualitatively. What are you most excited about from your unique vantage point, Mike?
Right. So you won't know if I'm telling the truth or I'm just trying to throw you guys all off the scent. I think actually, just under the umbrella of this topic, one of the things that I think that can be brought to the forefront, and we haven't really talked about, is shoulder programming, right? Because a lot of times your talent is stuck in the studio and you just can't, just cost prevents them from sort of coming out and being a part of the broadcast. And I think that of anything, I've seen an expansion. You talk about improvement of programming has been the ability to go out and do these things more on the road, be a little bit more immersive, and not spend a lot of money on it. And I tell you, I mean, besides our very, very biggest shows, we do that a lot. So I'm excited to sort of continue that. I think that when we get to Paris for Women's World Cup, I mean, the labor laws in France are absolutely insane. You know, they almost make it utterly prohibitive to do TV. So I think that will drive us to find more solution-oriented type of use cases for being back in the States, or at least having operating control services back in the States. Finally, I think production automation is something I'm really excited about. I think that when you look at a lot of these companies, and I've seen at least 5, who are developing tracking technologies for automated cameras and automated switching, and I don't think that, you know, you're just going to have, you know, an automatic production, but I think that in 2019 and 2020, you're going to start seeing a lot more technology maturing that will allow those types of automated capture to happen. So those are sort of some of the things I'm excited about.
I want to ask you a question before I let you answer that one quick. Are drones in your future at Skycam? Or are there issues? I mean,
No issues with drones,
I can
right?
think of
No, yeah, so not really. For us, if you've ever been around drones, they have short battery life. They make the biggest problem is they make a lot of noise, consume a lot of power. We have no noise, and we supply power all the time. So it's a market that, you know, if you're going to go capture a golf course or something, it might be a good use, or B-roll or something, but it's really not core to what we do, although we do have a lot of leveraged labor or guys that you know, work for us, sort of have that in their wheelhouse. But for us,
just an
not really.
aside. So 2019 and beyond, what are you fired up about?
There's a big game, I think, in a week that we got to figure out. So to get through that, and then obviously the launch of AAF is very exciting for us.
Yeah.
We'll be doing, you know, the duels that they really started with Mike at Fox and the team at NBC has really, that's become a staple now, and it's to this point where, you know, AAF, we're looking at doing every game with duels, so that's a big, which is 2 Skycams for those who don't know. That's obviously great. The market as a whole is very bullish, I think, not just on Skycam, but as technology and production value and production enhancements. And so we typically get brought along with that as well. So we're doing more events. We're going to cover the basketball NBA All-Star game as well. So we're doing another event for Red Bull for the crashed ice up in Fenway. So there's a lot of just new opportunities where it just seems there's people aren't afraid to, whether it's Skycam or additional technologies or enhancements, really sort of improve their productions or try new things, and that's great for the market.
Okay, good. Chris, I'm going to ask you an aside before I get to your future question is, so Turner's made some investments in other companies, Bleacher Report, right?
Yes.
Where you've got snackable content. How does those platforms that are emerging, tough to monetize, I know, but just as you're trying to feed them with content, how does that change how you do and your team does what they do every day?
So it's actually created some interesting dynamics at Turner, things that we've not really had to face before. It becomes a tonnage thing, you know, because now and then we talk about all the transport methods. You know, it's how do we get all of this different content from all of these different leagues back into our plant so that we can turn them around. And so, you know, are we bringing them as digital feeds, meaning, you know, at no point will they touch any form of a linear production workflow, but then a month after we've brought it in, there's a request to have a copy of it, which doesn't exist. And so, like, it's opened up a number of things that just as a group we've never really thought about before, just trying to essentially feed this monster with live content essentially all the time.
Very interesting,
And you know, for Turner, it's a little bit of it's sort of uncharted territory for us, but it's a good thing. It's a good problem to have, and we continue to work through it. But
Tremendous.
But ironically, it sort of leads into sort of the things that we're excited about the future, right? It's you know, we've begun to pick up a lot of these very interesting and unique, yet still premium packages that have a market, they have a place, they have an audience, and we're trying to figure out, you know, how best do we bring that in? How best do we consume it to turn around and present it to the people that ultimately will want to take it in? You talk about there's a larger variety of activities and events out there that are now available for us to try to capture, but at the same time essentially make easy for the consumer to get. How do you direct the consumers to it without confusing them? The list kind of goes on, and I think one of the other things that is really sort of front and center, for me at least, is actually social. We have our social team, and they are trying to do, and they are getting into more and more live content as Twitter goes after more live content, as Facebook continues to go after more and more live content. So, our social team is working kind of nonstop. The only thing about social, as most people probably know, is because the way that the social markets work, the revenue that's generated by them is for them, not us, even though we're working and trying to build the production. So how do you make that work? And how do we come up with things that are very neat, very innovative, and actually generate social buzz? Because if there's a bad idea and you're doing it on social media, you will find out really fast.
Yeah. Well, I think the simple answer to that, though, is that you go out and buy Bleacher Report or other things like it, right? Yeah. You can't, fight them, join them.
Right.
Yeah, or have them join you.
So I mean, I think that's what's really exciting right now, because it allows us also to defocus from the NBA on TNT and the conference finals and All-Star. You can kind of put that to the side a little bit, and really sort of dig into sort of this newer this newer medium or this newer method of reaching basically a completely different fan base.
Great, Tom. Last word.
The thing I'm looking forward to in 2019, obviously, is the AAF. That's going to be our big kickoff. But also, we're pushing a ton of other things out right now that are going to be more. We have more products, more things. Sorry, I got confused by the noise, the sound. Sorry. We've got a lot of other opportunities coming down the pipe that we want to try to fulfill. With, like you said, shoulder programming is a huge part of this, and to be able to be that group that actually provides an answer to your space needs and everything. That's kind of what we're going for in 2019, is to try to be the trendsetter for where things need to go and be ahead of the curve a little bit. So it's always a fun place to be.
Good. Well, I think we're going to hit our mark right on time. Thank you, all of you. Thank all of you. Thank you for letting me join you. And they're around, so we don't have the ability to ask questions here, but certainly find them throughout the day. And thank you all. Thank you.